And we are now recording. So Dave, I muted you, Dave. You can't do it there. Oh, there you go.
Good to go?
Yeah, we are good.
All right, guys. Well, welcome to Preserving Your Home Collections. We've been, of course, everybody with COVID has been stuck at home. We haven't been able to do our normal programming at the Heritage Center. So we've been trying to come up with different things that we can do for our members and our patrons. That way we can still connect with you guys. And the idea for this actually came from a request from another organization about having us do a talk similar to this. And we thought this would be a great program to sit down and talk to everybody about, because in reality, we all collect something. And whether it's baseball cards or stamps or, books, whatever it is that your hobbies or your interests are, you probably collect something related to it. So we thought it'd be a cool idea to spend about 45 minutes to an hour and just kind of talk about how you can care for your home collections at home at a relatively cost-effective price, and still do it the proper way in terms of how the American Institute of Conservation of Historic Art and Artistic Works would recommend. And so we're going to spend, like I said, about 45 minutes or so. I'm going to go through different do's and don'ts of home preservation. I'm actually going to walk you through a couple steps in terms of my personal collection at home, how I do it. And actually, my system here is very similar to my system both at the Heritage Center and at a couple of my other jobs. So I'm going to show you some examples of how I do cataloging, how I create and organize the collection and things to that like. And then, of course, I'm going to discuss some do's and don'ts. So if anybody has questions, just let Teresa know. I'm going to try to do all the questions at the end, if that's okay. But if there's something very pressing that you want to ask while I'm going through a particular topic, please just ask Teresa, and then hopefully we can get your question in at that time. But if not, just write it down and save it for the end. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you have then. So let's get into it. The do's and don'ts and how to preserve your home collection. So I don't know what you guys out there collect. Myself personally, I am a big autograph collector. I collect everything from signed photographs to signed hockey pucks. I have a couple of signed Penguin jerseys, hockey sticks, you name it, I probably have it signed. If you're ever at the Heritage Center and you come into our office, you'll actually see the majority of my collection as far as autographed golf flags are concerned. So like I said, I'm a big autograph collector. I've been collecting them most of my life, actually. And I really got serious about it now that I'm a little bit older. I can put some money into it. And I do a lot of my autograph collecting through the mail. And so every day I'm excited to get a text message from my mom for stuff that's come into the mail, or I can't wait to get home and check my own personal mail here at my apartment to see if I got anything new. And doing what I do for a living, preserving historical artifacts and photographs and documents, I tried my best to adhere to some of the practices when it comes to preserving my collection here at home. And I'll be honest with you, up until very recently, I have not necessarily followed the perfect ethics of preserving my collection at home, mostly because it's depending on how you do it, it can cost a little bit of money. So I spent about $200 or so this year and invested in some folders and some boxes. And now my collection, for the most part, is going to be preserved in a way that hopefully they should last, until my kids and grandkids and maybe even my great grandkids inherit my collection someday. So I'm going to start with the do's and the don'ts as far as preserving your home collection. So let's start with the do's. And one of the very first things I want to talk about is handling your artifacts. So the uh, the most important do when it comes to preserving your home artifacts, your home collection, is make sure that when you are handling any of your collection, whether that be photographs, documents, um, books, make sure that you are in fact handling them with freshly washed and dried hands. You would be amazed just how much damage over time the oils in your fingers and your hands can do to paper and photographs and even the pages of a book. And included with that would also be home videotape, film, even textiles. They all are affected by the natural oils in our skin. So, and the dirt in our skin. So make sure no matter what you're handling, the first thing you do before you handle it is you wash and dry your hands. So mine are clean. I washed them right before I sat down here. So when I handle my stuff, I know I'm going into it with clean hands. So make sure, especially in this pandemic time, whenever you're handling your collection, and of course during this pandemic, make sure you wash your hands. So the second thing, as far as physical handling of your collection, is especially with paper and photographs, is use two hands. This seems rather simple, and you're probably wondering, well, why do I really need to use two hands? For artifacts that are already beginning to deteriorate, if you're handling photographs that are, say, 100 years old, and depending on how they have been stored over the last 100 years, they may be brittle, they may be beginning to crack and flake. If you've handled old newspapers, I've dealt with some at one of my other jobs where you literally, even with two hands, you would pick it up and it crumbles in your hands. So they weren't stored properly when I got my hands on them. But just holding a photograph or holding a document with two hands by the edges is better for the preservation of the structure of that particular item. And the same thing goes for books. Books were meant to be cradled in your hands or in your lap. They really weren't meant to be laid flat on a surface. The spine broken in some cases to lay flat. So you want to make sure that you use two hands. Like I said, it seems kind of silly that that's the case, but it really is important when you are working with your collection that you do in fact use two hands. Now, actually, to jump back into the handling, I don't have any here, but we do use them occasionally at the Heritage Center, and I have used them in my other jobs. You can wear white cotton gloves when you are handling a collection. Now, that kind of cuts down your ability to maneuver through different things. But if you're ever showing your collection, if you're working, you're showing it to somebody and you want to make sure you preserve, you can preserve it. And especially in a case if you aren't able to immediately go and wash your hands beforehand, white cotton gloves are a great way of preserving your photographs and your documents. So that's definitely a do. Wash your hands. If you can't wash your hands, wear white cotton gloves, and make sure when you're handling your artifacts, especially your documents, your photographs, and especially if they're already aged and showing signs of deterioration, make sure you use two hands. So that's a big thing. The next thing is identification. So, anytime you have a picture, so let's say you have a family photo of you and your kids, and you want to write on the back exactly who everybody is in the photo. That way, when your great grandkids are looking at this picture, they know exactly who they're looking at and who is in this picture. And our instinct is, especially nowadays with the way the photo paper is that you want to use ink, you want to use pen, you want to use Sharpie, you want to use magic marker. That's a big no-no. What you want to do is use pencil. So if you have a paper document that you are saving that you want to identify exactly what it is, or if you want to label it with your, say, your collection management number, which I'm going to get into in a second, make sure you write everything in pencil. Regular number 2 pencil, the Dixon Ticonderogas work fantastically. That's what you want to do to identify anybody in a photograph, anybody in a newspaper or something along those lines. Now, I know like I said, the current photo paper really doesn't allow for that to happen. So the best thing to do in that case would be to get a little slip of paper, write it in pencil, keep it with that particular photograph or with that photograph, because you probably are not going to be able to write on that photo paper with a pencil. But if you can, especially if you have old photographs, pretty much anything prior to, I would say, the 1990s, you should be able to write on them with a regular number 2 pencil. And that is the best way to identify who is in the photo and put your number for your cataloging and organizational purposes. And actually, this was always been taught to us when I was in graduate school and learning how to do a lot of this stuff. I was always recommended pencil, and it really was driven home for me. Last year, I had the opportunity to meet Dustin Johnson. He's a professional golfer and won the 2016 U.S. Open at Oakmont. And we were having him sign some different things for our collection up at Oakmont Country Club. And he requested, when he was signing things, especially things that had paper on it, he requested a pencil. And I said, well, why exactly do you want a pencil? And he said, pencil never fades and pencil lasts forever. Ink fades, ink, bleeds and can be wiped off. He goes, if you use pencil, he goes, it will never fade. And it can be erased, of course, but at the very least, it will never fade like ink does and like marker does. So when you're identifying any of your paper documents or your photographs, please use pencil. That is the safest and the best way to preserve the photographs and the identification of the photographs. Now, the other thing I want to talk to you about with identification is creating your system. How do you break your collection into, say, categories? How do you break it into specific groups or things like that? How do you identify it, and then how do you find out where it is? So the typical museum system, every artifact, every photograph, every piece of paper, every book gets what we call an accession number. ACCESSION, accession number. And what this number is, it's a very simple number in reality. And I'm gonna give you the example here of 2020.01.03. Now, the 2020 number is used as the identification of what year that particular item or category was created. So I'll talk a little bit more about my system and the museum system in a second, but I'm just going to give you a basic instruction of what this number is first. So 2020 is the year that this particular item was entered into the collection. The second number, 0.01, is the number in which that artifact came into the collection in that particular year. So let's just say I donated this cell phone and I donated it today. And it's the first thing that you are collecting in your collection. So it would be the first item of 2020. It would be the very first artifact within that 2020 calendar. So it would be 0.01. And then the next number would be 0.01, or in the example I gave you at the start of this, 0.03. And what that number is, the individual number for the artifact that came into that first grouping of 2020. So again, for example, if I gave you my cell phone and you incorporated that into your collection, it's the very first thing you've ever collected. It would be 2020.01.01. Now, when it comes to the museum collection, that's how we catalog everything that you guys donate to us. So everything that came in this year during the 2020 calendar year, the very first number in that accession number is 2020. And let's just say you gave us the 47th group of artifacts that year. It would be 2020.47. And let's just say you gave us 20 things within that group of stuff you donated. So your numbers for every one of those artifacts would be 2020.47 and then 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, all the way up to 0.20. So that is how we do it at the museum. That is the proper way of the library sciences cataloging system. And it makes for less confusion down the road of when exactly something was donated, who donated it, and things along those lines. So if you were running a museum, that would certainly be the way I would recommend you cataloging a more quote unquote professional collection. Now, when it comes to what I do at home, and actually what I've been doing in my other work with a couple of local country clubs is I break down that number based on a specific category. So for example, I'm going to share my screen here and I'm going to show you this spreadsheet. So I hope everybody can see this spreadsheet that I have up here. So I'm currently working with Allegheny Country Club to catalog their entire historical collection as it relates to the golf course, their tennis, their equestrian, and all of their history. So if you look on this spreadsheet, I have the accession number for each collection, starting with 2020.01, which was the very first collection that I organized, going all the way down to 29 right now. And I will continue to add those collections as I go through and we find different topics and that haven't already been separated and they're going on. Now, if you look, every number 0.01, 0.02, 0.03, so on and so forth. In this case, the number 0.01, 0.02 talks about a specific category of collection. So you'll see on this spreadsheet that 2020.01 is for the 1954 U.S. Women's Amateur Photo Collection. So everything in that collection, everything that has that 2020.01 number has to do with a photograph related to the 1954 U.S. Women's Amateur that was held at Allegheny Country Club. Now, if I show you my personal collection, you'll see that 2020.01 is my PGA photo collection. So it has anything to do, any artifact or any photographs that are signed in my collection have that 2020.01 number. Now, jumping back to this collection here, when I go into the actual catalog, you'll see here, this is 2020.02.01. That has anything to do, any physical artifact to do with the 1954 U.S. Women's Amateur. So 2020.02.01 A through D are official USGA scorecards for that event. So those scorecards would have that number on it. And you're probably wondering what the A through D is. That means that we have four identical scorecards that we have incorporated into the collection. So the first scorecard of those four would be 2020.02.01A. And then, of course, the second one would be B, C, and D. I personally, in my professional work, I keep four of everything. We've come to find that if you are keeping 4 of everything, you will, you really just need 4. You need 1 for display purposes, 1 as a backup, 1 as a loan to other institutions and organizations, and 1 for public handling. So let's just say you came in and you wanted to see this 1954 scorecard. There's 1 that is always in the collection. There was 1 that we have on display. There's 1 that we loan to, let's say, the Heinz History Center. And then there's 1 that you could come in and physically touch with your own hands. So I hope that's not too complicated, the number system. And if you have any questions on that, I'll certainly be happy to answer them at the end here. But that is how the 2 different ways you can do it, as far as whether it's a professional collection or your home collection. So like I said, in my personal stuff, I use I break it down into categories, and I did all of mine this year, as you can see on this on your screen now. I have it broken down into different categories. So I have 2020.01, which is my my PGA Tour collection. 0.02 is my LPGA Tour collection. But then you have 0.07, which is my Pittsburgh Penguins collection. And then you have 0.13, which is my Hollywood Stars collection. So that is how I break it down into these specific categories. And then the number was given to each of these collections based off of the order in which I completed my cataloging of them. So that is that as far as identification is concerned. Now, the big thing that I want to talk about next is storage. Storage is the most important thing when it comes to preserving your home collection. And there's a couple of different things that I want to talk about in this regard. And the biggest thing I want to discuss is basically the 3 things that harm your collection more than anything. The first thing is exposure to light, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in the don't section. The second thing is temperature. And the third thing is humidity. Those are the 3 things that can affect your collection more than anything. So to start with the storage portion of this, let's first talk about temperature and humidity, because that is certainly the most important. It is best to keep all of your artifacts, whether that be photographs, documents, clothing, whatever that is, books. You want to keep them in some sort of temperature/climate controlled area. Now, I'm not talking, a 0 pressure area. I'm not talking anything, excuse me, incredibly ridiculous. I'm talking about a bedroom in your home. I'm talking about your living room. You just need an area that is typically kept between 65 and 75 degrees with relatively low humidity. So, for example, let me give you a couple of numbers here. The optimal storage situation for books, as far as climate and temperature is concerned, is in an area roughly around 70 degrees with a relative humidity of 50%. Now, relative humidity is the ratio of the partial pressure of the water vapor to equilibrium vapor pressure of water at a given temperature. I personally am not a scientist. I got that straight from Google. I don't know exactly what that means, but I know this. If you are in a more humid environment, such as a basement, such as a garage, a crawl space, it is much more detrimental to your collection than it's sitting in your living room or spare bedroom, or if you're lucky enough to have maybe a little study, than it would be if it's sitting in that area. So for books, you want to be around 70 degrees with a relative humidity of roughly 50%. When it comes to film, You want to be in an area roughly around 68 degrees with a relative humidity of 20 to 30%. Photographs, again, somewhere in the neighborhood of 68 degrees with a relative humidity of 30 to 40%. And then finally, I just have documents here, and that is any area below 72 degrees with roughly 30 to 50% relative humidity. So if you can keep your collection in some sort of typically controlled environment, again, your living room, your bedroom, a study, a man cave, whatever that be, you have a much better chance of preserving your collection for the long term. So think about that when you are displaying artifacts. If you're putting up bookshelves, where you are putting it and where you're storing stuff if it is not in your house. Garages, attics, basements, crawl spaces, these are the worst places for you to store photographs, documents, textiles, books, basically anything really. These are terrible places to store that because it's not climate controlled. In the summer, your basement or your garage, or your attic is extremely hot. In the winter, it's extremely cold. Your basement is typically incredibly damp, or the freezing and thawing of the ground affects the outer walls of the foundation of your house or your apartment. So that all plays into the preservation of the climate within your household, and then obviously the preservation of your artifacts. So you want to make sure you stay somewhere in that neighborhood of, let's say, 65 to 75 degrees. If you can stay in that neighborhood, you'll do a very good job at preserving your collection. Now, of course, if your heat goes out all of a sudden and it gets really cold in your house for a couple of days, it's not going to affect your collection really at all. If it's a prolonged exposure to extreme heat, extreme cold, extreme humidity, then yes, that will damage your collection. But on a given Tuesday, when it's 68 degrees in your house or your apartment and your humidity is low, you really aren't going to have to worry too much about the depreciation of your collection. All right, next, what you're actually storing your artifacts in. So this is a great time to show you a couple of the things that I personally use and what we use at the museum. So when you're storing any documents, any photographs, basically anything that will fit into a folder or a box, you want to store it in an acid-free and antimicrobial environment. So for example, here, this is an acid-free antimicrobial folder. It has a pH of 8.0, so it's completely, I believe that's completely neutral as far as that's concerned. So what this does, it doesn't have any acids in it, which of course acids over time can seep into documents. They can seep into photographs. They can, they can have all kinds of adverse effects on your particular items. And the same thing with microbes. We're talking dust. We're talking mold. We're talking, microscopic insects that can damage your collection. These folders will prevent that in reality. Now, I will tell you, these are not cheap. These antimicrobial acid-free folders run for about $50 for 100 folders. It's very expensive. It is what we use at the Heritage Center, and I do use them a bit in my personal collection at home, but they are expensive. I'll be the first one to tell you that. I had to order more yesterday, and I couldn't justify spending another $100 on it right now. So what I did then is I went on to Staples, and you can purchase, you can see this here. It is a 3-tab file folder. These are acid-free. And acid-free is one of the biggest things, you'll want in a folder. Obviously, if you can get antimicrobial, you definitely would want that. But if you're just starting out and you want to do basic preservation of documents and photographs you have, these Staples file folders that are acid free, they'll suffice, especially for a beginner preservationist. I believe a pack of 50 costs somewhere in the neighborhood of $9. I ordered 8 packs of them yesterday because I have some more of my collection that I need to get organized. I've used them at my work at Oakmont Country Club and Allegheny Country Club. They work perfectly fine, especially in the very beginning of your preservation work. They'll suffice. When you have the ability to spend the money on a folder like this that costs $50 for 100 of them, then by all means, certainly do that. It would be to the benefit of your collection. But if you're just starting out, you can certainly go with just the basic manila folders as long as they're acid free. That is the key. Make sure no matter what folder you buy, acid free. Key. That's the absolute key. Now, behind me here, and I'll pull it up. These are very similar to the boxes that we use at the Heritage Center. These have an attached opening. You can buy these where they are separate lids and things like that. But this is also an acid-free and antimicrobial box. It is an archival box. You can purchase them on Gaylord Archival, University Products. We purchase ours from Hollinger Metal Edge. Depending on the size of the box and depending on what you're looking for, they can cost anywhere from $10 a box to $20 a box. If you are looking to preserve oversized pictures, so basically any picture over 11 by 14 inches, you can buy what we call oversized boxes. It's made of the same material. Again, it's antimicrobial, it's acid free, and that is the key to preserving your collection, is keeping it in that environment. So I personally believe that the box is the key. The folders being acid free is also very important. I don't necessarily need antimicrobial right at the start, especially if I'm on a budget. But if you can buy the acid-free antimicrobial archival boxes to store your photographs, to store your documents, you're going to be ahead of the game. They're going to do much better than the average plastic file folder or plastic folder or plastic document boxes you can buy at Walmart or Staples or things like that. The plastics have acid in it. They have oil in it. They will break down. They can certainly affect what you're storing in them. So again, a box like this is the way to go. And again, they're not ridiculously expensive. Like I said, you can get them from anywhere from $10 a box to $20 a box. If you're buying the oversized or ones that would fit textiles, they are a bit more expensive. You're probably talking $25, $30, maybe even $40 a box. But if you're just storing photographs, you're just storing documents, this regular archival letter box is perfect, and you can get them for as cheap as $10 a box. So that is the best I can tell you as far as physical storage of your materials. The next thing I want to talk about as far as the do's is it's better to be vertical than to be horizontal. And what I mean by that, and this really fits more into the discussion of preserving your books, and if you have VHS tapes and things like that. You don't want to stack books. You don't want them to be laying horizontally. You want them standing vertically on edge with the spine showing. And there's a reason bookshelves are designed the way they are. That's the reason why, the spine has the title and the author showing, is because if you have a book that is not standing perfectly straight up, or if it's laying horizontally, or it's stacked with multiple books on top of it, you are actually putting an immense amount of stress on the physical capabilities of that said book. So if you have it just leaned up against your bookshelf and it's not flush, you're putting a lot of pressure on the spine, on the physical structure of the book, and over time that will deteriorate. It's the same thing if you have books stacked upon each other. That weight eventually will affect the structure of the book. So there's a reason why bookshelves are made the way they are, and there's a reason why you should display them standing vertically and with the spine showing, and that is a big reason why. So again, I personally am guilty of it. I do stack books on top of each other. Sometimes need requires that, but if you can, you want to make sure you have your books vertically on a bookshelf. And the same thing with VHS tape. VHS tape can be uh, compromised if it is stacked upon, if it's laid flat. You want to make sure that they are also standing vertically, because any pressure on the tape inside, that magnetic tape which has the video on it, can be compromised by weight and different forces. So when it comes to VHS tape, when it comes to books, you want to make sure they're standing vertically on their edge, um, with the spine showing. Again, it seems absolutely silly, but that is the proper way of storing it, especially, if you don't take it from me, take it from the American Institute of Conservation, which at the end of this, I will show you their website. You can go on and read more in depth about the caring of everything from books to textiles to film to glass to whatever. They have a lot of tips on how to preserve and then how to present your artifacts on display. So the last thing, as far as the dues are concerned, is what I label as organization. So when we get stuff donated at the museum, the biggest thing I tell my staff as far as what I need to know about it is, what's its number, what is it, where is it? Those are the three most important things I need to know. So when I'm working on an exhibit, perfect example is I just got done with Parks and Recreation over at the Heritage Center, and I needed stuff for, let's say, Rainbow Gardens. I would ask my staff, I would search in our system, Rainbow Gardens, what do we have and where is it? So what I'm getting at here is you need some sort of catalog, you need some sort of organization to know what you have and where you have it. So I'm going to share my screen again with you guys, and I'm going to show you two different methods that you can use for free at home, if you are not willing to spend several $100s on a professional software. At the museum and at Oakmont Country Club, I use the Past Perfect Museum software. It is a very handy software program for museum and cataloging purposes. I really do like it. I will probably start using it at home here once I can get the system uploaded onto the computer. But it is definitely a more professional system. It's definitely more for a larger organization like a museum or a historical society, but you can certainly use it for your personal collection. But again, it's not cheap. And these two options that I'm going to show you here, a basic organization, do come for the most part relatively free. So the first one that I'm going to show you here is what is called forever.com. And basically what it is an online storage system for your photographs. And it's actually a Pittsburgh-based company. And I use this over at Allegheny Country Club, and I use it for my personal collection too, because it is free up to 2 gigabytes worth of material. So as you can see here, I have my, if you go by library, you have all of these individual pictures. If you go by albums, which is how I typically view this, then you can see each individual collection. So you see I have the number, my session number, and then the name of that collection. So I have my PGA photo collection. So if I click on this, it'll bring up everything that is in this particular collection. So it's all of the signed photographs that I have. If I go into, say, 2020.04, here you'll see all of the golf flags. So it's broken down into particular categories. And if you look here, each thing has a number. It has the photograph of what the item is. It has its name, which is the number. And in this case, it is the 2015 US Women's Open flag. It has a description, which you can see here. This flag from the 2015 US Women's Open at Lancaster Country Club in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The flag has been signed by the following contestants, and these have been the ones I've been able to identify. You can have when the photo was taken, if you know that, of course, the date it was uploaded, and then actually the file size of that particular thing. And then one of the things I love best about the Forever system is its searchability. So you can see here that I have all of these names and different things, and these are what we call tags. So let's just say you called me up and you said, Dave, what do you have as far as Anna Nordquist stuff? Do you have any pictures signed by her? Do you have anything, in that collection? Well, if I go to tabs, you will see that anybody that I tagged in a particular thing will come up. So if I want to search for Anna Nordquist right here, this will bring up all three things I have related to Anna. So I do have a photo and I have 2 flags that have her signature. And let's just say that I'm looking for, let's say I'm looking for the US Open. So we would search down here until we get to US Open. Oh, where's US Open? There we go. We'd click on that, and anything to do with the US Open would pop up. So you'll see here that I have a number of pictures in this collection of, the champion with the trophy. You would see the flags from US Opens and things like that. So the tags in this is just really a way, an easy search of, okay, well, what do you have generally in the collection? So by searching this page, you would be able to see what I have based on a specific person or perhaps a specific category. So I really like Forever. It's relatively user friendly. And again, it is free up until 2 gigabytes worth of information. You can purchase more. It's a little expensive to purchase more, but it's not totally ridiculous. But the other thing I really like about Forever is its accessibility. So I could share my collection with you anywhere. I can send you a link. You would be able to go in and peruse my collection. And the other great thing is right here, they have an app. I could pull it up on my phone. And if you can see there, you can see my entire collection through my phone. So it's always with me. So if somebody asks me on the spot and I'm not near a computer, all I need to do is pull out my phone and I can search it. So that's a really great thing about Forever. I highly recommend it. We're actually using it at the Heritage Center now as well to help have people identify our unidentified photographs. So if you checked if you get our e-newsletter, if you check our website, you would actually be able to go on our Forever account for the Heritage Center and see items that are in our collection, and you'd be able to help us identify these people so that way we can preserve this history. So I really like Forever when it comes to that. Now, if you were going to get a little bit more technical, the where things are and things like that, Forever doesn't have those capabilities. Past Perfect does, but the other simple method of doing that, again, would be simply here on this spreadsheet. You can use Excel. This is a Google spreadsheet on their website, on Google's website. And as you can see here, we have the accession number, the object title. If it's uploaded to Forever, everything in the collection has been. Where in the computer you can find it. So for my job over at Allegheny, all of this stuff would be in a folder on the computer, ACC artifact artifact photos folder. And then within that folder would be another folder for the U.S. Women's Amateur. Do we have a physical copy of it? Yes. Physical location. What shelving unit is it on? What room is it in? What shelf is it on? What box is it in? As you can see, all that is currently empty because we are still in the process of getting organized as far as space over at the club. But it gives you the opportunity to do a very simple cataloging and know exactly where things are. So, for example, if I can pull up my, let's go back to the screen here. I'll show you my boxes here again. I hope you can all see that. This is box 1, and this houses all of my photos related to the PGA Tour, whereas other boxes, have different things in it. So I'm still working on that part of my collection, the organization of it right now. I'm focused on getting everything into a folder and into a box. But, being able to know where everything is once you do start preserving and cataloging and things like that, those are a couple of things you can use to do that. All right. So that was all the do's. Let's get into the don'ts. And I'm going to go through this pretty quick because it's all relatively simple. We're going to go through the same categories. Handling. Do not touch your paper, photo, textile, any of your artifacts, your photos, whatever your collection is, with dirty hands. That doesn't necessarily mean you have dirt on your hands. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have foodstuffs or whatever. Your hands over time collect dirt, they collect oil, and these all can eventually damage your collection. So do not handle your collection without washing your hands. That's just absolute key. Don't touch it with dirty hands. As far as identification is concerned, I mentioned this earlier. Use pencil. Do not use ink. Ink over time fades. It can bleed into the photograph or the document and permanently ruin it. So you want to avoid using ink as much as possible. Again, if you can use pencil, use pencil. Avoid inks at all costs. Storage. Basically the opposite of what I said earlier when I talked about the do's. Do not store things in extreme heat. Do not store things in extreme cold. Do not store things in damp places. Extreme heat dries out and makes brittle paper and leather. And it can do the same thing for photographs. So you do not want to store things that are in a particularly dry area, such as an attic, or even near a source of heat. You don't want to store things near a fireplace or a radiator or directly in front of your heat register that's blowing the air into the room. You do not want to have direct heat or even direct cold on your collection. And then again, the same thing with damp. You do not want your collection to be in a damp climate. You don't want it in the basement. You don't want it in the garage. You don't want it in a place that is particularly humid. I kind of run into the problem that my apartment is a walkout apartment. So I'm partially underground. So it is typically semi-damp in here. I run a dehumidifier pretty frequently to kind of keep things dried out in here. So you want to do your best to avoid keeping your collection in a damp area. So keep it out of the basement, keep it out of the garage, even, keep it in your bedroom closet, keep it in a hall closet. As long as it's somewhere that is typically relatively climate controlled, that's where you want to keep your collection. The other big thing is try to avoid light, especially ultraviolet light. Sunlight is incredibly damaging to anything, whether that be textiles, photographs, paper. The sun is incredibly strong and can really accelerate the deterioration process of your collection. So you want to make sure you avoid direct sunlight and really a direct light from overhead as well. The old the old line of thought as far as preservation is concerned. And if you ever go to, say, the National Archives, or I worked in a museum in Boston when I was in grad school, you'll oftentimes go into these rooms where precious documents like the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights or the original charter for a state or something like that, you'll go into a room that's pretty dark, and there will be light right around that particular artifact. And they say that 6 candle lights, so the light source emitted from 6 candles, is enough light to read any document, but it's not enough light to damage the document or the photograph or whatever. So obviously that's not always the case. If we have stuff hanging on our walls, you're gonna get some light exposure. But if you can limit direct light exposure, particularly from the sun, you'll do yourself a great service in preserving your collection at home. And that leads me to my final don't, and that is don't store books or display framed photos, documents, or what have you on an exposed wall. Because of the fluctuations in the climate outside, your outer walls of your house or your apartment tend to change. If you hold your hand to the outside wall of your house or your apartment, it'll probably feel much different than an interior wall. And if you have artifacts in a frame or books on a shelf on an exposed wall, you're prone to condensation, you're prone to mold growth, you're prone to dampness, which will deteriorate your artifacts, which is exactly what you want to avoid. So when you're setting up bookshelves, when you're setting up, or if you're putting stuff on the wall to display, you want to try to avoid having anything that you would hate to see damaged put on an exposed wall, unless you have incredibly good insulation. Then you should be okay, but you want to try to avoid exposed walls for your storage and your preservation. So that's basically the do's and don'ts of that. And I want to show you an example of something that can be severely damaged by not following these rules. And a lot of the times this happens just from plain ignorance, from not knowing how to properly preserve things. Things end up in the attic, things end up in the garage, in the basement. Things get moved from somebody's house to somebody else's house, and they're not looked at over or particularly cared for. Not through any intended malice, just through regular negligence. But I was very lucky. A couple years ago, I was given this book, and I don't know if you can see it. It is The Famous Leaders and Battle Scenes of the Civil War. And this belonged to my girlfriend's grandmother's brother, and it is dated to, I believe, 1897. And it has all these beautiful engravings of the leaders and the battles of the American Civil War. And it's just, I was blown away to be given this. And it's such a cool book. I'm going to try to hold it up that way you can see. See, folks, that's exactly what you do not want. As you can see. So this book was stored in my girlfriend's grandmother's attic for, how long would you say? Probably 30, 40 years, 50 years, maybe. It was exposed to ever-changing climate conditions, extreme heat in the summer, extreme cold in the winter. So it broke down the binding of this book. It broke down the paper in some sense in this book. So the binding of the book is detached from the pages within. The binding itself is starting to break apart. The pages have yellowed and frayed on the edges. In some places, it was held together by by tape, which you should never, ever use tape on your documents. If it's torn, just let it be torn, and don't tape it together. Don't glue it together. There's acids in tape. It breaks down. It deteriorates the paper. It discolors the paper. So if it's ripped, it's unfortunate, but don't try to fix the rip. Just let it be ripped. And the other thing that's very important is do not keep anything folded. Say you have a piece of paper, it's folded in half. You want it to lay flat in a folder. You do not want it folded, because over time, with that crease, the paper is eventually going to rip in half. So you want to make sure, when you put something into a folder, that it does in fact lay flat. So for example, here we go. Here's the folder. My photo lays in there perfectly flat. There's no creases in it. There's no bends in it. It lays in there flat, and it is preserved. This is a book. That book that I was just showing you. That's a perfect example of what extreme heat and extreme conditions can do to one of your artifacts. So you want to try to avoid that from happening. I'm hopeful that someday I'll be able to get this book restored and repaired with a new cover, and get the spine and the pages all sewn back together. That is a hope of mine. And you really just want to try to avoid those don'ts when it comes to the preservation of your collection, because chances are you're collecting this stuff because you're interested and you're passionate about it. You want it to last forever. Maybe you want to pass it along to your kids, maybe your grandkids, maybe your great grandkids. So do yourself a favor, take these basic steps: acid-free folders, acid-free boxes, use pencil, don't use ink, don't use tape, don't use staples or paper clips, because they over time rust and deteriorate the paper or the photographs. You can take these simple steps and again, keep your collection in a relatively climate controlled area, and it should last for several generations by taking those basic steps. So I think I have droned on long enough. That was about 45 minutes. So if anybody has any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer. And one thing before I do turn it over to questions, I'm going to share my screen here real quick. If you go to this website, it comes up as culturalheritage.org. And you can click on the About Conservation tab. This is the American Institute for Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works. And if you go down, they have all kinds of different information on conserving your collection. And if you look here specifically, you can see architecture, books, glass and ceramics, documents, furniture, home videotape, metal objects. It gives you the proper care, the environment, how to maintain, how to limit light. It gives you everything you would need to know to preserve your collection from home. I highly recommend, if you're interested in anything I talked about tonight, to use that website and read through some of those tabs. We could post it on our social media pages. That way, if anybody's interested in going on it and viewing it, you certainly can. Or again, you can just search that website, which is again culturalheritage.org, and then click on the About Conservation tab, and you will be able to read up on any of that stuff. So, any questions for me?
Feel free to unmute. I've unmuted everyone, but I see some people still have their own mute on. So feel free to unmute and just ask your questions for Dave.
Dave, I've got a simple one. For old photographs, these happen to be 80, 90 years old. They're bent. What's the simplest way to get them back so they'll be easy to scan?
So as far as scanning is concerned, you should be able to put it in your regular photo scanner. For the most part, I use a regular Epson photo scanner that you can buy at any office supply store for about $100. You can put that in there and put the lid down on it. It'll scan it without the curve. It'll scan it. You'll get a good high quality scan of it. I would say the best thing to do would be make sure that you put it in a folder, make sure it lays flat. Once it's in a box and you have the pressure of, that box being completely full, it should start to flatten them out over time. If you're really like you want it flattened immediately, you could put it in a folder, lay it flat, and then maybe even lay a couple books, even though that would break the rules of having the book stand vertically. If you had something heavy that you could sit on top of that folder, the weight of it should begin to uncurl it. But like I said, if you have an entire box full of photos in those folders, the pressure of all those folders stuck within the box should over time help alleviate that curve.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, so if you have all the photos, can you, within a folder, can you stack them together?
You're talking about putting multiple photos in a folder.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. You certainly can do that. I personally typically, with my home collection, I have everything in an individual folder, mostly because everything has an individual number, and that's just the way I do things. For work at the museum, I can assure you that a lot of the times we do keep multiple photos within one folder.
Okay.
That won't necessarily damage anything. I would recommend putting an individual photo in an individual folder, but you don't necessarily have to.
Mhm.
And especially if there's no deterioration of the photos already, you should be fine.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Well, since you're on, let me ask you one more. I've got a photo here that was probably taken in the 1840s or 50s overseas. Is there a way for me to try to find out with what limited information is on the back from the country and so forth about the approximate year that photo was taken?
Can you hold it up directly to your camera there? That's a cool picture. And flip it over.
And I'm sure this is a great relative, and it was taken in the city called Virovitica, which was part of Yugoslavia back in the 1800s. And it has the name of.
So my guess is probably the best way of finding your answer will be to do some Google searching if you haven't already. If you can search that particular photo studio, maybe there's some sort of information about it online. I don't know. Newspapers.com has over 110,000 newspapers, and we have access to it at the center. I don't know how deep their international newspapers are, and if it was in the former Yugoslavia, you would probably need to be able to speak Slavic to read a lot of those newspapers. Just based on what I could see of what you just held up, you're probably looking somewhere, like you said, you're probably looking 1880 to probably about 1900. I think tintype were the typical photos, especially during the Civil War. And then as the war went on, they got better as far as the technology, as far as printing it onto paper. So that photo that you held up is probably somewhere between 1870 and probably about 1920, 1930. It was really about at that point where they switched from using it's on like a cardboard almost, where it just, you got a print and it was just on regular paper, for lack of a better term. So you probably have about a 30, 40 year period of when that photo would have been taken. and then judging, you know, if you can judge by the clothes and things like that. And the big thing is if they're smiling or not. You know, believe it or not, smiling for a photo is a more recent trend than it was. If you ever look at the old pictures back in the day, you weren't supposed to smile. So you can actually kind of start dating pictures based on, you know, how people are posed and things like that.
Well, thank you very much. Most helpful.
You're welcome. Thank you. Any other questions for me?
Dave, real quick, not to take up too much of your time, how would you go about preserving and storing maybe an unorthodox item? You mentioned, for example, signed hockey sticks, something with kind of odd dimensions. How would you go about that?
Well, that is a great question, because that is something that I am still trying to figure out what exactly to do with my signed hockey sticks. When it comes to pucks, I have a number of signed pucks. I will probably put them in a box. They'll probably be maybe in an individual folder, and they'll be put in a box. Just that way, they're in a more controlled environment. You can get different products to store hockey sticks and baseball bats and things like that. University Products, Gaylord Archival, they have a lot of that kind of stuff to preserve different things, like, you know, whether it be a hat, a hockey stick, or, you know, watches. They typically make a box for almost anything. What I personally do with, say, a signed hockey stick, right now, I have I actually put a giant eagle bag over the blade where it's signed, and then I tape it closed that way. You know, it's not rubbing, anything's rubbing against the signature or things like that, until I can get it properly displayed somehow, actually. That's the one thing over the years with my collecting. You know, I've gotten different stuff signed over the years, whether it be pucks or sticks or things like that. And the thing that I've come to find that I enjoy collecting the most is photographs, simply because it's really simple to store. You know, if it's not on the wall, it's in a folder, in the box. You know, when it comes to, I have a couple of signed jerseys. Theoretically, I would want them in a textile box, which is very similar, just a much bigger version of the regular archival boxes with acid-free paper and things like that. Right now, I just have them in a garment bag, and I try to keep it in in the closet, and, you know, one that's not exposed to outside walls or a chance of leakage from above or below. So, you know, it really, it's tricky. Without spending a ton of money, it can be incredibly tricky to store stuff like that. I can tell you up at Oakmont, I've tried to put everything I possibly can into these archival boxes. So anything that will fit, whether it's a golf ball, whether it's a lighter, you know, you name it, I've probably put it in one of those boxes. And at the Heritage Center, we typically stick to these archival boxes, whether they be the documents, the postcard. You can buy them in the size for postcards. You can buy them in oversized for larger photos or posters. And you can buy the textile boxes, which, you know, are probably about 2 feet by 18 inches and probably about 6 inches deep or 8 inches deep or so. And you can try to get as much stuff as you possibly can in that. I know that, like, with stuff we have at the Heritage Center, whether it be umbrellas or things like that, we try to keep them. We try to keep everything together. We actually, for lack of a better use, with umbrellas and canes and things like that we've acquired over the years, we actually use a really tall, brand new waste bin. That's probably about a yard high or so. That way they're not lean, they're in there straight. And at the very least, they are standing straight up. They're not, you know, they're not really in any particular chance of getting damaged unless somebody went crashing into that can. but that's been our method of storing stuff like that. It is still exposed a little bit to the elements, but you know, our facility is humidity controlled. It's temperature controlled. So even though it's still exposed to the elements, it's in a hospitable environment. So hope that answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dave, I just thought of something. I started collecting first day covers when I was very, very young. And
Okay.
as you can see, I'm no longer young. And as I recall, they're in a box, they're in a closet, I believe. But the old storage method at that time, the albums, as I recall, had like cellophane sleeves.
Yep.
And I was just thinking I should get those out. I don't know what value,
So
you know, they are now, but you know, to upgrade the storage for
Yep.
them.
So I will say this, we at the Heritage Center have gotten to the point now that anything that was in a photo album, and I know exactly what you're talking about, we're taking it out of that. A lot of those old albums, very similar to what you're talking, would have like that clear cellophane on top, and then almost like it could have like even a glue on the sheet. That glue is not good for the preservation of artifacts. In the old days, it was great as far as, you know, putting photographs and, you know, and these first day covers on. And over time, the glue dries out, they start to fall off. It discolors the artifact because it was the adhesive eventually stains it. So what I would recommend is if you can pull them out without damaging them, I would certainly pull all those out. And like I said, a pack of 50 of these from Staples is $8. Even if you were putting 5 or 10 of them in a folder each, you know, I would do that as opposed to keeping them in that folder or in that binder or album. Now, of course, it's much easier to view it in that album, but a lot of those albums, especially if they're the ones I'm thinking, that they do have that adhesive, which, you know, if they were glued to that, would be damaging to them. So I would certainly take it out of that and put it into a regular acid-free folder, especially if you're interested in preserving them for quite some time.
Well, and at this point, yes, I don't know what value, but I know I had a considerable amount of money invested in them. So
Depending on what they are too, there's still a value in them for sure. I know what you're talking about. I see them a lot with my work with the country clubs in different auctions. Those first day covers, they come up a lot. Sometimes they're signed by a player. Sometimes they have a particular scene or event on them. You know, depending on what they are and what's on them, there is a value to them. There's people that collect them. So, and again, if say you had one signed by somebody, you know, that of course the signature adds to the value too. So yeah, I mean, they're definitely something that people collect. There's still something that people collect. And if you can do these simple things to preserve them, then I think it would be worth it.
okay, great, thanks.
Okay. Any other questions?
I think that's it. Well, thank you all for attending. Thanks, Dave, for a great presentation.
Yeah, thank
Very
you, everybody.
informative.
Thank you.
All right. Don't forget to check out our website for upcoming events. November 11th, we'll have a special Veterans Day presentation on Zoom. Bob McPherson is going to talk about, Dave, do you happen to recall the gentleman's name?
Caston Young, I believe.
Thank you. And it's going to be a very interesting topic. So I hope you guys all join us again. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you stopping in.